Kombucha is a fermented tea. Almost anything you can forage, you can turn into a kombucha, which you then have the opportunity to turn into a carbonated drink or ferment much further, make it really acidic, which then gives you a vinegar substitute, which is sort of like a single stage ferment, whereas vinegar you'd normally have to wait a year or so for it to turn into a wine and then turn it into a vinegar. So it's a much quicker, more versatile way of keeping up with the seasons. So what makes kombucha unique is that it's a symbiotic fermentation. So simultaneously you have yeasts that are fermenting the sugars that we add into the sweet tea into alcohol. And then you have bacteria that are then turning those into acetic acid. So a kombucha will always be like around 1, maybe 2% alcohol, but it never gets any higher than that. It will just become more and more acidic. So here I've made a shot of about 550 mils of water, which I'm going to then infuse and make the sweet tea shot by putting the tea and sugar into it and dissolving it. Then to save time, we're going to add it into the fermenting jar with cold water already so that it crashes the temperature to a safe range for our microbes to start fermenting. As this is going to be a black tea kombucha, we've got hot water that's 90 degrees or above for the infusion. But if you want to make things like rose or elderflower, cold infusions in a fridge overnight are the best way to extract the aroma without losing any of the nuance. So if you're making kombucha this way with water that's straight from a tap, you either need to make sure that it's a filtered water or bottled water. The alternative is to use regular water if you have safe drinking water and bring it to a boil, make the tea from the whole lot, set it to one side and then let it gradually cool. There's a bit of a sweet spot when it comes to kombucha. If you add too much sugar, you can actually knock the microbes into sort of a stasis, which is kind of a handy way of actually stopping a ferment and just preserving the SCOBY if you don't want to keep making continuous batches of kombucha. If you use too little, it runs out of food and just stops metabolizing. So I'd say the sweet spot is around 10 to 12 bricks. So for this recipe, which is going to be about 2 litres of tea plus about 20 ml of mature kombucha, is going to be about 220 grams of sugar. And all the measurements for these recipes can be found down below. Something else I get told a lot online is that you shouldn't use metal when it comes to kombuchas or a lot of ferments. A lot of people seem to think that all metals are somehow antimicrobial, but commercial kombucha is brewed in stainless steel vats. So stainless steel, like the spoon, will cause no problems whatsoever. Now that's been brewing for 5 minutes, I'm going to pop it straight into the cold water to crash the temperature down. Now we've got the sweet tea that's prepared for the SCOBY, which a lot of people think is the floating jellyfish-like thing that is in kombucha, but it's not. SCOBY actually refers to the entire microbial population which is floating around in the tea. It's the stuff that gathers at the bottom and it's the stuff that makes the raft, all of which needs to go in when we're inoculating, and when we do, it'll be about 10%. 10% of mature kombucha is enough to inoculate against any of the nasty pathogens that might also want to get in, and also raise the acidity enough to muscle out any competition. So first I'm going to add the raft, just to stop it from splashing in, and then 200 grams of the mature kombucha. So kombucha is an aerobic fermentation, so it needs a breathable lid. If you were to close it off, then that means the yeast would do its thing and you actually stop the bacteria, so it would just become kind of a weird beery wine thing. So we're going to use a breathable lid to stop any kind of pests, fruit flies and what have you going into it, which they will try. And as it ferments, which is going to be happening at about 20 to 25 degrees Celsius, which is just the general rule of thumb, you want to make sure that the raft, which it will form new rafts at the surface, you'll see the new ones are the ones that appear much paler and more kind of whitey coloured. They will form at the surface with no liquid above them, and if you let them dry out over about a week or so, there's a chance that they could spoil because it's the liquid that's acidic. So every so often just open it back up and use a spoon to push them down and sort of base, the top in mature kombucha. So after about 6 or 7 days, you want to start tasting it and just to see how acidic it's become. If you're making a vinegar substitute with it, let it keep rolling. It doesn't need refeeding, probably pushing it almost into about a month or so to get it really acidic. And it is the same bacteria responsible for vinegar, so you do get that tartness, which is lacking in a lactoferment. So at about between 5, 6 to 7 days, depending on the temperature you're keeping at and the taste of acidity that you're after, you want to bottle it. But bear in mind that it will continue to get a little more sour once bottled. So catch it just before it's sort of at the ideal sweet spot for you. When bottling, filter out the solids, add a teaspoon of sugar per litre of kombucha bottled, close it, shake it to dissolve, and leave it again between 20 to 25 degrees Celsius for 2 days before putting it in the fridge. That should make a nice, lightly sparkling kombucha. Another consideration to make is what kind of sugar you're using. So I tend to stick with lighter sugars like raw cane or golden granulated, but you get some really nice flavours from muscovado or demerara sugar that you can add into a kombucha for more malty complex flavours. So this has been bottled and aged for 2 days at room temperature at about 25 degrees Celsius, and then popped in the fridge for a couple of days just to chill. And you can see that even though it was filtered, the yeast, because it's not pasteurised, do continue to ferment with that little bit of extra sugar in there, and they can form little bits of sediment or little bits of SCOBY. You don't have to eat them, they are edible. Always hold your hand on top just in case. I'll try some. It's really good. It's still very sweet, but nicely acidic. And kombucha works, as we mentioned before, with all sorts of infusions. You can make it from like orange peel or blossom. You can make coffee kombucha. You can, almost anything you can forage, you can turn into a kombucha. A lot of people will do an infusion when it's bottled, so they'll make a black tea kombucha and then just infuse it with other things like ginger or herbs or citrus once it's in there. I prefer doing kombuchas as a single infusion up front and then plop in a SCOBY in, and you get much more out of it when you've fermented all of those flavours together. The SCOBY, the raft, will inherit some of the flavour from that, so you can't then use, say, a coffee kombucha SCOBY in a rose kombucha because it will just make it taste like coffee and it will muddy the flavours up. You can interchange SCOBYs between lots of different floral ones or lots of different citrus ones and kind of keep these different living libraries going and just constantly make all sorts of different kombucha. So I look forward to seeing the kind of creations you guys come up with. And remember, if you do accidentally make one overly acidic, no loss, just let it become a vinegar and use it in your cooking and salad dressings and stuff instead.